Today, the Green Bay Common Council is expected to approve an ordinance that would allow police to impound vehicles suspected of reckless driving. The new rule would let officers impound vehicles while issuing tickets or making arrests relating to reckless driving. Under new Wisconsin law from last October, the department will have to work to determine if that impounded vehicle is stolen and return it if possible. If it's not stolen, then owners would have to pay to get that vehicle back. If that's passed tonight, the new ordinance would go into effect immediately. The vote is set for 6 o'clock tonight.